Okay, our next expert is Eddie Doyle. He is the cybersecurity evangelist from Checkpoint Software Technologies. Eddie, the floor is yours.
Did you know that the world's very first computer was built specifically for the predecessor to the cybersecurity industry? Before cyber was even a word, back in the 1940s, the computer was invented to hack the analog encryption of the Nazi Enigma machine. For years, the Allied forces were baffled at how they could interrupt the greatest threat actors of the day and decipher their code. The great Alan Turing, to whom this world owes a massive debt of gratitude, created a computer to do what no single or group of people could do. The Enigma had a daily potential combination of roughly 150 million random set of numbers and letters. It would have taken thousands of years of man hours, and they had just days to do it. Today, it is estimated that modern computers can crack the Enigma in just 13 seconds at a cloud computing cost of only $7. So in the span of 70 years, we've gone from Turing's computer, the size of a truck, to just a keyboard and a web browser using compute power in the cloud. The technology changes, but the threats remain the same. Bad people want to steal your property or cause damage to you, your family, your organization, or your country. As traditional warfare demonstrates, those with the best technology usually win the war. In 1184 BC, the Greeks appeared to have departed in ships, leaving behind a large wooden horse as a victory offering to the Trojans. This was technology of a sort. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that only ideology seems immune to technological advancements. Despite having smartphones with more compute power than Alan Turing's Christopher, modern medicine, which can use a robot to perform surgery, or driverless air taxis, right? People's ideology is very slow to change. And it's a very strange phenomenon from where insider threats will originate. Ideology is seen in today's cancel culture, prevalent on 24-hour news networks. A person decides on something that fits their worldview, and instead of having an open mind, they fit so-called facts into their own narrative and then drown out anything which opposes their view. It's a very dangerous time, and it's not surprising. At no other point in human history have so many cultures been brought together overnight with technological advancements that should have advanced people's thinking, but instead people look past the inspirational innovation of the new world and seem to dig in their heels to promote whatever genius idea they think they've concocted. This is how insider threats are created. Take the infamous case of Edward Snowden, glorified as a defender of truth. Now, my view on Snowden has been very unpopular in cyber circles since his 2013 theft of classified intelligence. But let's model healthy disagreement for just a moment, since today's cancel culture seems to lack the maturity to listen to opposing thoughts. Snowden has an ideology. What else would drive a man, right, living on taxpayer dollars in Hawaii to risk life imprisonment and abandon his family? This is the power of an ideology. But the reality is that the Pentagon and CIA are actually very forthcoming about policies and procedures. Take enhanced interrogation, for example. Waterboarding was being used at the beginning of the Iraq War, and the Pentagon said, we're not so sure about this, so let's put it out there for public debate in a controlled, safe fashion so we don't compromise troops and assets and have a public debate. The American people were outraged and said, no, we don't want to be the nation that tortures. So the program was shut down. Snowden claims to have redacted his theft, but his Pulitzer Prize winning chasing substandard journalists had no idea what they were doing, and the lives of brave servicemen and women were unfortunately compromised. All they did was bring forward information prematurely at the cost of lives when Western democratic governments were and are already bringing these topics to public discussion anyway. So here's an irony. For all the rhetoric we hear in news, life is so much better today than it was even 10 years ago, and definitely better than it was when Turing invented the first computer. There's less violence, less poverty. The global GDP in 1960 was 66 trillion. Today, it's 88 trillion. Do you know that more people die of obesity-related diseases around the world today than from starvation, which is progress of a kind, I suppose. But it's progress of a kind, I suppose. So why is it that all we seem to hear are the screams of people saying how bad life is? It's the same problem we face in cyber. We only hear about the hacks, which is totally unfair to you, the cyber community. The threat actors can be wrong 99% of the time. They only need to be right once. You, on the other hand, need to be right 100% of the time. You only need to be wrong 1%. When you're wrong once and the media is all over you, but you are 99% right. At any university, for almost any other job on the planet, a 99% track record would be outstanding. We need some perspective, the same kind of perspective that Alan Turing had to force within the British intelligence communities when he was building this thing, later known as a computer. You see, when true innovation occurs, it disrupts people's thought patterns. It's not easy to understand. But in thinking about it as innovation, it might give non-cyber folks some patience to understand us. Because technological advancement in compute power, innovation, which used to happen every few decades, I should say, now occurs every few years and even sometimes within a month. So we can summarize the past 25 years of cyber evolution through what we call a generational lineage of attacks or cyber defenses. Articulating our message as cyber professionals in this manner will help coordinate our colleagues in alignment with our security needs. Think back to the birth of this industry in the late 1980s to early 1990s. Antivirus was needed to keep individual computers safe. We'll call this Generation 1 attacks or Gen 1 protections. Generation 2 attacks quickly followed in the 1990s as cyber hacks started to spread from one computer to another throughout entire company networks and had a paralyzing effect on businesses, driving the creation of the firewall by Gil Shwed, CEO of Check Point and arguably the founding father of cybersecurity. So now, in addition to AV, companies add firewalls to their data centers, and not just one, but to safeguard against equipment failure, they bought two. So companies added firewalls to their data centers, not just one, but to safeguard against equipment failure, they bought two of everything so that they could have redundancy. And this was advised by the Forresters and Gartners and other organizations and colleagues within the industry to make sure that our engineers were engineering an SLA that we completely and utterly could rely upon. IT became more and more essential in the 2000s. By the time Generation 3 attacks came to marketplace, we started to see attacks against applications. Application control was therefore needed, and a myriad of other intrusion prevention type of technologies. So now we have corporations buying AV, firewall, IPS, not just one, two for redundancy. And then it was recommended by all the analysts, You buy one set for the outside, one set for the inside. You're starting to see how the multiple layers of cyber are adding complexity to our environments. Around 2015, Generation 4 type attacks started to see unknown, evasive, polymorphic attacks hit people's networks. And this drove companies to add to the already very crowded AV, firewall, and IPS technologies such as anti-bot and sandboxing to their environments. But then large-scale multi-vector attacks started to take place around 2018. Think of NotPetya, right? These massive fallouts from huge, potentially nation-state type attacks. And so in addition to AV, firewall, IPS, sandboxing technologies, anti-bot, we add threat prevention, cloud technologies on top of this. And to exacerbate the problem, and in an effort to satisfy consumer demand over the past few years, tech companies have continued to advance their compute capabilities. And so cybersecurity technologies listed here were also replicated for people's personal devices, IoT devices. And this brings us into what we are now calling Generation 6 cybersecurity threats and advancements that are needed. Nanotechnology. The development that's taking place right at the cutting edge of our systems at the moment is to actually start pivoting the problem of the cloud by using the strength of the cloud, the elasticity of the cloud, so that we build our own threat cloud to service any device that's out there, including all of the billions of IoT objects in the marketplace. Now, the problem with developing and building layer upon layer upon layer of these technologies is that you have too many blinking lights in your data centers, ladies and gentlemen. This is the enemy of preventative architecture. And with our dying breath at Checkpoint, we will maintain that prevention, not detection, is the only methodology of true architecture for a cybersecurity network. Now, of course, the elephant in the room for prevention are false positives. What if a false positive, if I get rid of that any rule at the bottom of my rule set, and a false positive slows my business down to a crawl, I'm going to have a very uncomfortable dialogue with the CEO. We understand this, and with a hand on my heart, we empathize with this, but it's not nearly as scary as you might think. In actual fact, the CEO, the general counsel, the CFO, all of these people actually understand and calculate downtime into the business. The weather, for example, causes downtime in some businesses. Employee sickness, strikes. There are multiple factors that the C-suite within any organization currently understands as something that needs to be priced into the equation so that our corporation can continue running when, not if, there is a disruption in business flow. Now, that's not to say that you can tolerate an unlimited amount of disruption, but it is to say that you can ask the uncomfortable question. You can ask the question to the business, how much downtime could we tolerate? Now, that's a horrible question. We get that. But as I said, employee strike, sickness, weather, whatever it might be, that is a question that is modeled into the business. Once you know the answer, it could be 10 minutes a month, which is an eternity in our world. We can engineer an architecture in full prevention mode for your organization, getting rid of that any rule so that we no longer have what we would call a super fast router. But what we do have still is a blinking lights problem. Complexity is the enemy of security. If security isn't simple, it isn't followed. A perfect example of this is the requirement of alphanumeric passwords for all of our users. Now, we know what has happened with this. We've been battling this for 20 years. We've gone to the smartest people in the world, like PhD mathematicians and linguistics experts, given them a Western QWERTY keyboard and said, make the most robust security system you possibly can with this thing. Upper caps, lower caps, digits, numbers, minimum 8 letters, alphanumeric nightmare. And NIST's latest guidelines no longer recommend that users change their passwords on a regular basis because people tend to run out of complicated things to remember. It actually reminds me of a time when I walked into a pub and I said to the bartender, what's the Wi-Fi password? I just need to log on. He said, oh, you have to buy a drink first. I said, okay, fine, I'll buy a Guinness. He said, is a porter okay? I said, sure. So then after the porter came, I said, hey, what's the Wi-Fi password? He said, you have to buy a drink first. No capital letters, no numbers, all lower caps. So that drink cost me $10 back in those days. But this is the problem that we have, is that we have no idea how to, we've basically given the burden of security to the rank and file who do not think in ones and zeros like we do, because we were drawn to this industry, because we've created systems that are overly complicated. CISO magazine, CISO Online, has estimated that the average enterprise corporation has 70 cyber vendors in its network. Now, I actually think this is a little bit of an overstatement, but I can believe they have around 50. So imagine this, you've got 50 different vendors in your network. You've likely got multiple redundant devices, and for each location. So this is thousands of things and blinking lights to manage. And so your SIM, you get a SIM to make sure you can manage all of these blinking lights, but it's still blinking a lot of lights. And you're afraid that the business will slow down to a crawl if indeed there's a false positive. So you throw that any rule in. Well, this is a problem for us. And this is our mantra at Checkpoint, that we state that prevention is the only way to do true architecture. And the way you can do that is by reducing the number of vendors, not by increasing them. The reality is you likely do not need the latest cutting edge thing that is out there in the market. Most people do not need it. So you could likely reduce your vendors to less than 10. And now you've got less blinking lights. And you can engineer an SLA to the business. 10 minutes a month, as I say, is an eternity. Now, some businesses, financial institutions, a minute on a trading floor is an eternity. It's still a math problem, though. This is still a math problem for us. And there is an organization out there that does this, an enterprise organization. There are actually quite a lot, but I can think of one in particular that you, the audience, this enterprise organization. They are in entirely full prevention mode in their architecture. Who are they? I mean, I can go into the details of how, but we need to do that over a longer period of time. So I'll just tell you the who. It's us. We drink our own Kool-Aid at Checkpoint. So we are in full prevention mode. We're an enterprise organization with thousands of employees, billions in revenue, situated, by the way, in the Middle East. So it's the subject of multiple cyber attacks all the time. And we don't just survive them, we thrive. And yes, we have false positives that impact the business. The question is not, will you have one? It's when you have one, how can you manage it for the least amount of disruption and never have to suffer the same false positive again? Here's where we have turned the entire nano security dialogue, this sixth layer of nano security that I'm pointing to over here now, completely on its head. So IoT devices that with the advent of 5G are coming your way, whether you like it or not. This is the shadow IT experiment that we did back in 2012 was just a warm-up for what's about to take place here. It is estimated that today there are 6 billion IoT objects in the marketplace. It's currently a $152, I think it is, billion industry. By the year 2025, there will be 21 billion IoT objects, and it will be a multi-trillion-dollar industry. So if we've got kids, we need to get them into IoT. But there'll be so many things coming your way that this will be too much to manage. Our answer to this problem is simply that we have already created a threat cloud that processes over 10 trillion access logs a day. We identify 86 billion indicators of compromise a day, which, by the way, we give all of that away for free. So that is all for you guys. You can go to our website, go to checkpoint.com, search around there for our IOCs. You'll see them free of charge, 86 billion a day. To give you a point of reference, because these numbers are so huge, guess how many Google searches there are in a day? Now think, billions of people on this planet, over 50% of people are connected to the internet now. I use Google, I don't know how many times a day. There must be a lot. There's actually only 6 billion a day. There are 6 billion Google searches a day. This little company Checkpoint, albeit that we are a little enterprise company, processes 86 billion indicators of compromise every single day. Shows you how busy the bad guys are. This results in us identifying 25,000 new and unique type of attacks every single day, right, within our systems. Now, that's just to show off and give you an example of how big this cloud is that we've built. So now, get this. You'll have IoT devices come your way. Our intent is to provide a very light footprint of security on every device out there, right? So whether it's a mobile device, an IoT device, a tablet, a desktop, it doesn't really matter to us anymore, because the intelligence of security will live in the cloud. Now we use the elasticity of the cloud so that anytime one of these IoT devices sees a threat, it calls home to the cloud. If we have the signature for it, we apply it immediately. If we don't, we code, if it's a 0 day, if you happen to be one of those, we code that immediately and then apply that code to the threat. Here's the beautiful thing. No matter where you are in the world, after we've seen the threat once, the data, of course, where it comes from is anonymized, right? It's all scrubbed. We can apply the same signature to all IoT devices and other devices across networks, across our 100,000 customers globally. So as soon as we see, I can see we're starting to wrap for time. I've got it, it's all good. As soon as we see the threat one time, the 999,000 other customers that we have are the beneficiaries of seeing the attack the very first time. So ladies and gentlemen, it looks like I have to wrap fairly soon. Here's my invitation. I have a fairly unique name, Edwin Doyle Manhattan. Type that into LinkedIn, you'll find me, I'm the only one. And I would love to continue this conversation with you in public forum over LinkedIn's newsfeed, engage you with our local resources in the area in which you're living, and actually sit down and go through this math problem with you and engineer a prevention architecture to the SLA that your business needs. It's a math problem, ladies and gentlemen, and there are smart enough people out there who can help solve this with us. With that, I wish you all good luck.